coming to the actual risky play, why did you use the word risky when you define
Mhm.
play, and what is the actual definition?
Right. Yeah. And great question. And if you think about kind of the play memories that we all had, and I've asked this, we've done it in surveys as well as in presentations. Um, by far and large, people are engaged in risk and risk taking in those play memories, and even the ones that you've described during our call, there's risk, and yet we didn't have a label for it. So why do we have a label for it now? So first of all, to give you the definition, so it's thrilling and exciting play where kids are engaged with uncertainty, and there's a chance of physical injury. And so if you break down each of those elements, thrilling and exciting. So it's the child that's really kind of wanting to push themselves, their own body, see how far they can go, see how the world reacts to that. It's like these little science experiments. If they know what's going to happen, it's not very thrilling or exciting. And also, if they don't push far enough, then it's kind of boring. And the uncertainty then is a very key aspect of that. It's like, you really are doing experiments with the world. If you know the outcome, it's not thrilling or exciting. And in terms of physical injury, yes, absolutely. There's a chance of physical injury. There's a chance of physical injury in sport. There's a chance of physical injury in your house, actually, and all sorts of places. And yet we have this overblown sense of what that involves. So there's 6 different kinds of risky play that have been defined in the literature, and more are being discovered all the time. So play at heights, things like climbing trees or things like that. Play at speed, like say a rollicking game of tag, or riding really fast on your bike. Play with tools, so things like building a fort, with hammer and nails. Play near dangerous elements like fire or water. Rough and tumble play, so like play wrestling or play fighting, and play where there's a chance of getting lost. So this is the kind of play that you were just talking about, where kids are allowed to roam their neighborhood with friends or on their own. And with younger kids, it might be hiding behind a bush in the playground, feeling like they're off, in the jungle by themselves or with a friend. And so, if you think about each of those activities, you can see why they've decreased over time and why we've had to come up with a name for them. So academically, we have to figure out what's missing, how do you measure it, and therefore, how do you figure out what the effect of that being missing is on kids? And then it's also recognizing that because that's missing, that we need to figure out what's missing and how to bring it back. Right. And so I use the term risky play, and I'm very intentional with that term, because if you tell people play, or even challenging play or adventurous play, everybody's like, oh, yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, of course, kids need to play. But then when it comes right down to it and the child wants to climb the tree or whatever the case may be, everybody's like, oh, well, not that kind of play. That's too dangerous, right? So it really is us kind of coming to terms with the fact that there is risk in play, and that's okay, and that kids need to engage with it.
Yeah, and without the risk, they're never really going to get comfortable with, they're too much in a safety net. And how do they overcome adversity, and how they become more resilient?
Yeah.
One of my favorite activities was just exploring. When I grew up, now it's no longer the case, but my backyard was actually a hydro cut where there was no roads or what have you. It was just the hydro poles, and there was a forest kind of in behind. So me and friends would go exploring in the forest and climbing the trees, but probably, and this would probably accentuate the risk of doing that. But one of my buddies, and I'll never forget it, I think we were in grade 3, he stepped into a hornet's nest. And needless to say, we had to run like crazy. But, after it was all done, and yes, he got stung a few times, I got stung a few times. We looked at each other and went, man, that was so much fun. And my parents were kind of like, what?
Yeah.
How could that be fun? But what then are some of the other benefits to risky play to help today's generation of kids?
Yeah, and I mean, these play memories are actually a great way to illustrate that. And first of all, I want to point out that what the play memories you've described mostly have occurred not in formal playgrounds, right? They've occurred in kind of ditches, ravines, out in the forest,
Yep.
the ones I talked about. And so, it's important to recognize why, right? So when I ask people think back to your favorite play memory, by far it's outdoors, right? So if we break down why outdoors, a lot of people talk about a sense of freedom and possibility outdoors. It's constantly changing. They can meet up with their friends. There's not adults around to tell them what to do. Also, they can make big movements, right? You can move quickly. You can climb trees. You can do things with your body. Because there aren't adults around directing your play, you can figure out what's your goal. What are you going to do? How are you going to do it? If you're going to build a fort, how's it going to happen? If you're going to, whatever it is, you're the one that's working with your friends to figure out what it is that you're going to do and how you're going to do it. And so if we break down some of those things, you've got physical activity. Kids are more active outdoors than indoors, less sedentary. You've got socio-emotional health. They're hanging out with their friends and they're figuring out how to resolve conflicts and all that kind of stuff. Really important. You've got self-confidence. I can do this. I just figured out how to do that. Resilience. Oh, we got stung by hornets. We survived, right? You also have executive functioning skills. So you have what's my goal? How am I going to attain that goal? Directing your attention to that. Those are all really important aspects of executive functioning. From the perspective of injury prevention, you've got risk management skills. How am I going to climb this tree? Which branch can hold me? How am I going to build that fort, etc. And then, of course, you have the other aspects of kind of being outside and in nature. So things like being around trees and the kind of emotional regulation that happens when you're around nature. You have access to vitamin D from the sun. It's important for eye health and myopia, the prevention of short-sightedness. So it's really kind of a litany of very positive effects. But where I take people back is just think about your own childhood memories. Break that down, and the research becomes intuitive.
Yeah, and another vivid memory I have in terms, it wasn't necessarily outdoor play, but I moved every year. I was a kid until I got to grade 8 because my father's job was a station engineer. He took care of buildings and it was 24/7, so we had to be close to where he was working. But one of the stints that we did was in the Northwest Territories in Frobisher Bay, which is now been renamed to the Inuit community up there, which I'm excited about because it was total white man's burden when we were there. But up there, they get huge windstorms in the wintertime. And I decided, you know what, I don't like walking through these wind tunnels. And I'll never forget, I decided to go outside, and it was a windstorm. And I was in grade 2, 3, so 7, 8 years old.
Yeah.
Walked outside, and big windstorm comes up. And they're like Chinooks. They're warm, and they carry you through. So it actually lifted me. And, I was 2 or 3. So I think it was, 300 yards, but it was probably like 30 feet. But I floated. I was actually like Superman. Wow. And that's what I want to do. Like, how do I do that again? And I kept trying to do it. But, then people saw me walking outside. You can't do that because this is not safe. I'm like, but it's fun.
Yeah.
Right? So, how do we bring that back? So the other side of the equation, those are the benefits, but what are the challenges that we face in the space that parents, their fears, because we're in a feared world.
Yeah. So one of the biggest fears is kidnapping. And so one of the statistics I share with parents is if you look, kidnappings by strangers are so rare that statistics aren't actually kept. But the last time there was an overview done, the stat that came back was 1 in 14 million. So just to give you a sense of what that means, it's the same odds as winning Lotto 649 in Canada. And one author put it as you'd have to leave your kid outside for 200,000 years, on their own, before their number came up, right? So kidnapping, despite kind of it looming large, is actually a very rare likelihood. In terms of kind of other kinds of injuries, motor vehicle crashes are the leading cause of death for kids, bar none. but it's kids in cars, not kids as pedestrians or out of cars. And so the ironic thing is that parents are putting their kids in cars, driving them around in order to keep them safe, when in fact they're putting them at the greatest possible risk. So in terms of kind of injury risk, yes, absolutely, there's bumps and bruises. There's even broken arms. That's, one of the leading things that happens to kids. But in terms of kind of long-term and serious injuries and deaths, they're extremely rare. And in terms of kind of looking across even the Canadian stats, so for example, 14 years of statistics across Canada, and there was 0 deaths from falls from trees, not one. And across 7 years of stats from falls from play equipment, there was 1. That's a rate of 1 in 49 million. So I guess what we try and get across to the parents with the stats is that the likelihood of injury is extremely rare. And if you kind of balance kind of the risk benefits, the benefits far, far outweigh the risks. So one of the ways we try and manage fears, and also to kind of give parents the sense of the kinds of limits that they have to put on their kids in order to keep them safe.
Yeah.
And what effect that has. If you're telling your kid you're going to get kidnapped, or it's too dangerous out there, think about how that will affect their anxiety levels, their depression, and we know that has an effect, as well as their not being able to have the benefits of the things we talked about earlier.